Welcome to the MSDW Podcast. I'm Jason Gumpert, editor at msdynamicsworld.com. And on this episode, I chat with AJ Ansari of Dynamics Southwest. We caught up last week at the NAVUG BCUG Summit to talk about the latest announcements from Microsoft and what partners are talking about, both between each other and with their customers. Hey, AJ, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for joining me here in lovely Phoenix, Arizona.
Thank you. It's a pleasure, Jason.
So I wanted to maybe start by maybe just tell me a little bit more about what you're doing these days. You've sort of changed roles and the focus is slightly different at the new role. Can you tell me a little bit about where you're at these days?
Yeah, I was fortunate to have an opportunity to start an organization called Dynamics Southwest. We are a Microsoft Dynamics NAV and Dynamics 365 Business Central, Power BI, Azure type of shop, and I stepped into an executive leadership role. So that's great in one respect, but I'm glad that I'll continue to have an opportunity to work in and engage with the Dynamics NAV and Dynamics 365 Business Central community.
Any headlines you're picking up from this week in particular that users seem to be paying attention to versus partners?
Yeah, I think one of the things that users are picking up a lot on is what Microsoft's doing around the intelligent edge. Most customers are on legacy versions of Dynamics NAV, and for them to get this opportunity to expose the data into the cloud, they are going to get a chance to work with Business Central as your counterpart or as a companion to Dynamics NAV. Get your data insights into Business Central and get information out of the intelligent cloud. So I think that is something spectacular that Microsoft's doing, and customers are really eager to see what it means for them.
I've been thinking about the same thing, but I think with all these NAV customers who I think will continue to upgrade, maybe I would guess at the pace that they kind of always have or have been tending to do over the years, it seems like you're going to see, it'll be very interesting to see next year how many customers are actually no longer NAV customers, they're Business Central customers, and how many are still holding back. And 2 years from now, how much that grows. It'll sort of be the I guess what you call it, maybe the organic side of Business Central adoption, which is just NAV upgrades. And then I think to a much smaller extent, you'll see perhaps the same thing with GP, far, far less. I think they'll probably just continue on GP upgrades, but there'll be that, and then there'll be the net new Business Central customers coming in from elsewhere, right? From another legacy ERP.
Right. I think on the organic side, as you mentioned, if I go back to the last time we had such a major improvement or a major shift in the direction of Dynamics NAV, it was around NAV 2009, and when Microsoft introduced a role-tailored client. And if we use that as a comparative or as history, you'll find that took about 3 years or so before most customers got onto the role-tailored client. I think the same's going to happen. Now, if in the course of the next couple of years, Microsoft adds a lot more functionality around manufacturing or warehousing, you might see some quicker adoption. I think end customers would respond to that. If you're an existing user of NAV, you'll probably respond to that and maybe make a shift a little bit faster. But about 3 years or so is where I would put where we'll see a substantial shift, I think, maybe towards Business Central on-premises from a traditional version of NAV.
Yeah, I could imagine that. I think with, like you were saying, with the intelligent cloud insights, I thought I saw somewhere, maybe this was just for Business Central on-prem, but maybe for NAV on-prem too. I knew that's sort of one of the last ones they're planning to build, I think. That was in some of the guidance. They're doing GP first, and they'll add SL and NAV. But I wouldn't be surprised if that is the one that gets the most uptake, especially if they can put sort of migration-friendly feedback or intelligence or analysis built into that, so you can say, hey, I'm tied into Business Central, and here's what it would look like on an upgrade. That would be... but I think at the same time, it kind of, by not focusing on that now, by counting on NAV users not upgrading right away, it buys them a little time to focus on the new companies, not get tied up with upgrade tooling that probably is very labor intensive to build out. So everything I've heard anyway, the focus really is on net new from Microsoft at the moment when they talk to partners. That was what I picked up on.
I did too, and I think if you saw some of the presentations from Microsoft, they talk about, I believe it was a $10.6 billion market opportunity in that SMB space, customers that we can reach out to and get on Business Central in the cloud. And a lot of them are, between 1 to 99 employees, and within them, most of them are the largest market opportunities between, I think, 1 to 20 or 1 to 40 employees. And that is not where the majority of the current NAV customers are. And so I think this is a new market segment that we're going to have an opportunity to sell into. That's where Microsoft's focusing. Coming back to, I think, the intelligent cloud insights and You may be using that as a concept for migration of existing users. I was talking to some peers, and one of the things that came up constantly in our conversations is, instead of maybe forcing partners and customers to move to Business Central on premises, maybe this is a softer approach where they're going to show your data that's in an existing version of NAV in Business Central, initially for reporting, and maybe that migration tool over time becomes a little bit better and a little bit better to eventually where you say, hey, all of this is already here. Why don't you just start using this as your main version?
Yeah.
So it becomes a natural progression. And we're not there yet, but I think that's kind of the inside joke, but maybe also the reality, right? If it's good enough, if it's that good where they can take all your data and meaningfully put it up there in the cloud, then why wouldn't you start using that?
Yeah,
and it's not forced. It's a natural transition.
It's one of those, it's an initiative. It needs investment and momentum on the Microsoft side. It needs investment and momentum from partners. I mean, it's one of these things, until you see how it plays out, you won't really know.
I couldn't agree with you more. Absolutely.
Whether it actually pays off or not. But I mean, it's also symbolic. It also says to everyone else who's already kind of in this space that Business Central is what Microsoft's prioritizing. It's not, older versions of NAV. It's not GP. It's not SL. It's Business Central. And I mean, to the extent that they're not going to recreate, analytical tools. They're not going to recreate reporting tools. They're going to build them once. They're going to build a connection to these legacies for people to consider using, and they'll make a case to take this approach. Whether people accept it is the other question.
Correct, and I think that investment being focused into one product, Business Central, and then having a consistent, a cohesive set of insights that they provide no matter what system you're drawing that data from, that allows them to focus on the strategy strong, and over time or progressively they'll keep building these connectors to get data in from the legacy versions of NAV and GP and SL. You're right, Business Central is absolutely where Microsoft's priority is, and I think partners have had a little bit of time to come to terms with it. I think for end users, it'll take maybe a little more. I think this is maybe the beginning of that process of accepting, if you're an on-premise customer, that this is where the future is. Yeah. This is where we're headed.
Yeah. I mean, and there are a few things that stand out to me as things that aren't there right now that Microsoft's promising will be there that I think they'll deliver on, but they're not there, so customers can't count on it yet, can't bank on it yet. Some of them I saw, I've sort of been, these ideas have sort of been kind of congealing in my head, if that's the right word, congealing or kind of formulating in my head. But like at the keynote today, for example, the contents of it were D365 customer engagement, D365 finance operations, D365 Business Central. If you went to that keynote as a GPUG member, it was, and you're all about GP, it was borderline insulting. If you really, as an event for you, I'd probably be a little annoyed that I paid, that was part of what I was paying to come to with this, because it had nothing to do with you. That's what Microsoft wants to talk about. I mean, it was really an event planned by, I think that particular event was planned by Microsoft, and they don't want to talk about GP, They
or NAV for that matter.
Or NAV. They did not talk about NAV at all. It was James Phillips's team's vision for the near future. But the thing I'm getting out of it is, and the thing I'm getting from this week actually, is I've sat in a couple of user story sessions, case study kind of sessions, and companies are building, with their partners, are building real value around tying D365 tools to PowerApps, to Flow, and doing things that would have cost them thousands, even though they seem like minor things, but they're costing them things that would have cost thousands of dollars to develop with their partner that they don't have to develop anymore. And they get that as in addition to kind of being on the newest version of the software. And I think as those examples, once, there's obviously key things still missing, gaps like CDS integration for doing real model-driven apps across the whole platform, and considerations like that. But once those things fall into place, assuming they do, and that's a whole other kind of topic, is their confidence in Microsoft to deliver that. But I think anyway that those stories will build up and will build confidence in users who aren't sure right now whether they think they can believe in it.
right? I mean, you made a lot of excellent points in the last couple of minutes, so I'll talk about at least two of them. One, PowerApps. I think it's a fantastic concept, and it's gone a little bit well beyond, I think, even the minds of customers, from a concept to somewhere where they can see practical applications for it. I think, as you pointed out rightfully, it's one of those tools that allows the user or the customer to take control of the creation of apps. I think it democratizes app creation at the corporate level. So much of what they're going to be able to do will not require a developer, and they'll be able to still keep it within the bounds of corporate security. So as Microsoft, then leading into this other conversation, which is CDS or Common Data Service, I think if you look at what Microsoft's committing to do, Business Central will work much better in the coming months and years with Common Data Service. And once it does, I think we move a bit closer to having these model-based apps instead of canvas-based Power Apps. Those will become closer to reality. And then you're going to see this consistent interface of Dynamics 365 beyond just what Microsoft is creating. Customer-created Power Apps will have that Dynamics 365 look and feel. The other thing that I was going to comment on is where you were talking about, how did users feel when they're sitting in a room in a Microsoft keynote and Microsoft's only talking about F&O and the CRM line of business applications and customer engagement, as it's now called, and Business Central. I think if you kind of go back a year or two and you see at that point, even Business Central wasn't on the radar. At that point, when Dynamics 365 was mentioned, most of the focus was just on F&O and on customer engagement. I think if you think about that and compare that to today, at least you should be happy that there's a strong messaging and commitment around what's going on in the mid-market, in the small and medium business, small and medium enterprise space. And if you also look at Microsoft's October release notes for Dynamics 365, Power Apps, and Flow, etc., there is a reference. I'll try to be about as accurate as I possibly can. And speaking from memory here, I think there's an internal classification of all customers of NAV, GP, and SL to Microsoft's, business leaders. Those are all going to be referred to as Business Central customers. So while maybe that's not being as clearly stated at these events, you will find maybe it's implied, and they're not explicitly using the words GP, NAV, and SL, but when they say Business Central, it encompasses all of that user base. I'll see if after our podcast, if I can get some of that information, I'll send that over to you, because I think that would be an interesting thing to point out in an article or in some other form of
Is it sort of positioning Business Central as like the parent product?
As the parent product, or I guess instead of saying SMB customers, I think the internal reference for all legacy NAV, GP, and SL customers plus Business Central customers collectively will be known as Business Central customers.
With what you're taking in, does what you're learning about the direction of the business applications team and their priorities, and maybe even larger Microsoft priorities, does that change your team's plans of what you're going to offer to clients, how you're going to package, either package services or propose projects to customers, maybe? Do you see it a lot, significantly different next year than last year, for example? Do you have to reformulate?
We do at a couple of different levels. So right after Directions, when we went back and looked at the opportunities that were in our pipeline, we assessed those opportunities, and with limited exceptions, updated all of those other statements of understanding, as we call our kind of proposal documents at the sales side. We started our process of changing them into a Business Central offering, whether it's a Business Central on-premises offering or Business Central in the cloud. I think one or two deals will still stay on NAV 2018 because we were very close to being closed, and I think after talking to the prospect, we agreed that it just made sense to continue on the path that we were planning. Internally, too, one of the things that we are going to do is it ties in with a session I did at Directions, which is we have to build a viable professional services model for these new customers who are in the small, medium business space. And one of the things I talk about in my presentation there is we largely treat SMB and SME as synonymous terms to small and medium businesses and small and medium enterprises. If you look, you're going to find that there's this divergence coming where SMBs are customers or businesses with 1 to 10 employees. And they have folks who typically share roles, and you don't have individuals who are dedicated in roles in certain areas. I think concepts like marketing aren't going to be managed by a specific division, and most of those are, smaller shops. those are the ones who we're going to be selling to. And we can no longer have hundreds of thousands of dollars in professional services estimates and contracts anymore. So we have to come down channel. We have to create viable, profitable professional services offerings where we can continue to be in business and pay to have the strongest, best technical resources on our team, while also making an offering that makes sense to these customers who are coming into and talking to us, the ones that things that they can afford.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear that you see that lower end as being, if I understand you, that's still an area you think that Business Central will sell well. The more I see it, the more I feel like they're trying to embrace up into the mid-market much more strongly than I thought before, and almost to the extent that I wonder how much overlap there's going to be with the low end of finance and operations. There's always been, right between NAV and AX. There was always some area of overlap. I just wonder how much, whether there's going to be the same amount, more, because I think as it adds features, it becomes a more, able solution, right?
Some of it is going to be dependent on ISV availability. So Dynamics NAV and Dynamics GP customers and partners can relate to needing 1 to 3 or 1 to 5 different add-ons while we architect a solution. And those could be in the area of warehousing or advanced warehousing with barcode scanning. It could be for forecasting of inventory needs, et cetera. So once those add-ons become available for Business Central, I think that's when you're going to get closer and closer into overlap territory with F&O. Until we get there, I think just the core Business Central product, it's strong, but I don't think it's strong enough in certain areas around our manufacturing, distribution, forecasting, et cetera, to where it can successfully compete against an F&O solution. It has certainly come a long way from since before it became Business Central, when it was Finance and Operations Business Edition or Dynamics 365 for financials. We now have a true mid-market capable ERP solution.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, and that's, I think, one of those sort of behind the scenes. I don't know how hard Microsoft's pushing. Maybe you have a sense to try to support those ISVs that they would really like to get their solutions ready for Business Central now versus, a year from now, or partners that they would really love to get selling it who aren't selling it yet. That was one of the, not to jump around too much here, but that sort of urgency and that sort of recruiting effort is just not clear to me how much of that's been done and how much weight's being put behind that component. I know there's obviously a lot of partner readiness stuff, and there's OCP, one commercial partner overall, that I think is sort of responsible for making that stuff viable. But how much sort of operational support is there for those? Should there be more?
So here's where I would, I think this is my understanding. I can't speak to how much Microsoft is working directly with an ISV or a certain number of ISVs to encourage them to move into Business Central. But beyond what OCP is doing, there's an entire initiative called the Ready to Go program, which folks from Kurt's team and I think Leslie Bacon, who have worked very closely with them, the Ready to Go, and a lot of other excellent people at Microsoft, they've dedicated an immense amount of resources, not just into aggregating content for readiness and training on the internet, but then also working with a select number of partners, because I think we all have to realize the limitations maybe even an organization as big as Microsoft has to face. Understanding that you can't be everywhere all the time. So selecting partners in different regions of the world to go out there and provide boot camps on AL extension. The big holdup I find is not that the partners aren't willing to go into that app source space or make their apps available. It's that they have traditionally written apps with very large footprints or solutions with very large footprints. And a lot of that also had a footprint within the base source code of Dynamics NAV, modifying, sometimes circumventing that code. Having to recreate that in the extensions model is maybe turning out to be a slightly bigger undertaking than anybody had predicted. So that, I believe, is one of the reasons why we're having a slower adoption or slower progression in the marketplace. I've asked at least 24 ISVs that we know in the NAV space as I was walking down the hall today, the expo hall, and the one consistent thing I hear is our app's been converted to the extensions model. We're in the app source review phase, or we were, and then Microsoft asked us to change so-and-so thing, or we have to create a marketing page, or so on, whatever else is being asked. So I feel like partners are a little bit further along, and the general consensus is in the next 6 months to a year, I think you'll see a lot of bigger ISV solutions in there.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, the thing I picked up on from directions was not the bigger ISV solutions, but so much talk about making tiny little ISV solutions, and that's wrapped into a whole nother conversation, I think, which is, what's a viable partner business going to look like in their Business Central, and so I think that's just one line of thinking that people are going through right now. It's just really I haven't industrialized this IP yet, but now maybe I really should.
This is, again, I'm not trying to make this a shameless plug for all the sessions I did at Directions. I had another session around the same lines, which was, if you just because you have IP doesn't mean you should put it on AppSource. I think part of the challenge is that almost every partner that's been in the space for a significant amount of time has created certain customizations that they've then used repeatedly across their customer base. And normally they haven't gone out and resold it through other partners because they recognized that there was a challenge around building a channel, selling, creating all the collateral needed, the desire to support, the ability to support, the desire to continue to improve, and the ability to continue to improve the product. Those weren't there. But now with AppSource, just having a marketplace to get in front of customers, I think partners are suddenly starting to experiment. And it's one thing to experiment with the smaller self-propelled solutions where a customer can figure it all out themselves. And a partner who may have created some sort of a medium or a high complexity solution, putting that up on AppSource is not going to be sufficient to just becoming successful. If you don't have the infrastructure to then go out and support the customers and improve and so on, I think it's detrimental almost to that business. It might
unless you're really geared up to do that.
Exactly.
Unless you're an ISV who that's what you do.
VARs and ISVs have different skills.
There are some out there who totally overlay a huge amount on top of the ISV through ISV Cloud Embed or. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot, and there's a lot of interesting. I was talking to another NAV MVP, a very technical person, and the idea of Business Central turning into sort of this sort of highly sort of I'm not sure the right word, but series of sort of combined extensions almost in the core product, and the ability to swap those out in the future. I mean, that's sort of a future vision, I guess, but it's really exciting in terms of what that means for Microsoft having a real business platform rather than an ERP.
It is very encouraging. I think it's, again, one of those things where it'll be a little while for that vision to become reality. But as somebody who's been in the Dynamics NAV channel for a long time, I think that's it's just exciting that we're working towards there, and where Business Central is going to be a series of smaller apps that Microsoft has created that work well cohesively, but then partners can choose to push their apps in the middle of those and maybe uninstall or disable certain Microsoft created apps to improve functionality. Just the opportunities as you think about that, I get real excited, but I also realize it's going to take some time to get there.
Yeah. Just one other random thought that's kind of come up on the SMB side here a little bit. I think directions too is sort of keeping the SMB side of the business apps team or the business apps community sort of youthful and not getting too old. Basically, bringing new talent in, bringing new business leaders in. You'd probably be a good example of someone who's on the younger side, who's sort of moving around and doing interesting things. I don't know if that describes it, but anything else you're seeing along those lines to sort of bring in sort of younger developers, younger people leading partner teams. Because Microsoft is really doing a good job of that. That's the other contrast. Like you look at the people in James Phillips's team across it, really in different sides of it. I mean, and someone else pointed this out to me. I can't take credit for this, but it's true. I mean, a lot of younger people, using sort of his maybe guidance from above, but using their own vision and their own judgment to formulate what we're seeing that comes up on stage during keynotes and just release notes and everything on down from there, right?
Oh, absolutely. And then I think I think back to what was this about 2 years ago or 3 years ago when Microsoft first debuted Visual Studio Code and AL, and the modern development environment for Business Central. And I believe it was Marco who up on stage said something along the lines of, we want that next generation of NAV developers or Business Central developers. At that point, it wasn't called Business Central, but the next generation of developers, we see those as, the guy in a Starbucks, with the laptop with a lot of different stickers, wearing cool sneakers kind of stuff. And traditionally right now, if you look at the developer community in the Dynamics NAV and GP world, they're very senior individuals, folks who have been in the channel a long time. I think they continue to be really valuable, but the big challenge was courting and building a successful NAV developer took a long time. C-side, CAL in general was a very unique language, and there was nobody teaching that in college. So you may have had programming concepts, but you came in and then you tried to learn CAL. It took a long time to get better. With AL, most .NET developers can kind of look at that and start to relate. And I think we're going to start attracting a younger developer crowd. I think also removing some of the barriers to entry for developers like Microsoft is doing. You don't have to be, in a real formal model to try to create apps for Business Central. So I think we'll also see, maybe a little bit of a garage development, and that's starting where people are starting to build apps out of their garage and start pushing them into Business Central. At first, that means we'll see some less than ideal apps. Maybe the quality will suffer a little bit, but from the heaps of those types of apps, we often get the unicorns. And, I think that's where we'll see some real disruption. The possibility of disruptions
and
really
I think,
good there.
Yeah, and the opportunity there, I think, also lays in the sort of the uncertainty about exactly what business models will work for successful partners. I think we'll see partners emerge, I think, that maybe people don't expect today, who have sort of figured out a combination of, components in their business that make it profitable and probably doesn't look exactly like a traditional ERP partner.
Yeah, I think anytime you have a major shift in the way we have to go to market, or a major shift in the direction of the product or technology of the product, that's when there's a shakeup that happens. I think traditionally larger partners who have been very successful at doing things a certain way may not be as quick to react, and when they're not, maybe they continue to be successful and they find a way to be successful because of the amount of resources at your disposal. But you'll also see a lot of partners maybe who will be complacent and will suddenly find themselves lagging behind in a couple of years, whereas the smaller, more agile partners who are hungrier, who are, I think, really buying into the Microsoft messaging, now have an opportunity to rise up faster and become pioneers and become more prominent in the marketplace.
Yeah, I mean, and if I could just make one small prediction, maybe going 5 years out here, but I think back to when Dynamics CRM Online launched, and Microsoft, was very eager to put, and that did happen. So, some smaller resellers came out with sort of more agile models that embraced the online approach. They were all snapped up eventually by larger firms and used to help build their own practices. So I think that could be a pattern. I think if some new innovative firms do emerge, they'll be used by the bigger firms eventually to help fuel their next generation.
Right, and I think at Dynamics Southwest we kind of are. That's the way we're envisioning the future. We are, I guess, in comparison to some of the larger shops, you could call us a boutique practice at about 21 people, but before I joined the company, one of the things that was really interesting was talking to the owners and hearing that they were really committed to the cloud service provider program, the CSP program, going in as a tier 1 provider. And they're investing what is, for an organization that size, a considerable amount of money to get a front row seat to everything that Microsoft is doing. And I would certainly hope we're successful, but I can say that we're positioning ourselves to give us the best chance of success. So we're hoping this works out for us, but I know we're not alone. There are a lot of other companies our size who are doing that exact same thing, and I think we're all trying to either build ourselves into very large companies on riding the wave of this new technology in the new market, or, as you said, maybe positioning ourselves well for an exit strategy. That could also very well be something that results from positioning yourself right and doing it correctly. Somebody who's bigger comes and snaps you up. Who knows?
It's fun, interesting stuff to think about. Bringing it back to this event, I don't know, anything else you've been talking to, let's say, users about in particular? Are you getting hit with any particular questions that have really stuck out this week?
You'd be surprised that not one person has asked me about Business Central or if they should move up to Business Central. I almost have expected that would be the conversation around the water coolers and the lunch tables and so on, and that hasn't happened. But what has, however, happened is a lot more conversation around technologies like Power BI. I think you're seeing more of that. I think people are asking and they're wanting to learn more about that. I think I'm also hearing more questions on Dynamics 365 for sales and the CRM line of business applications, I like to call them, or Microsoft now calls customer engagement. I think that I'm getting a lot more questions around how that works with Business Central or with NAV, and if they should look at built-in capabilities within the ERP system for contact management, or if it makes more sense to look at the other product. Part of the reason I think those questions are coming up is because they're seeing that as another component in the Dynamics 365 family, and now that conversation is more natural. It's kind of sad, though, that today that connector isn't as strong. But again, going back to common data service, I think as Microsoft strengthens Business Central's capability or compatibility with common data service, these connections between the various line of business apps and customer engagement are going to become more seamless with Business Central. So the communications are happening there. That's where the conversation is happening, which is great for Microsoft because they want this to be more than just an ERP play. Microsoft sees this as a larger productivity and a business play, building on Office 365 and with a strong cloud-based ERP solution matched up with a strong customer engagement solution and democratized reporting and business intelligence. So that's where I think the market is reacting the most.
Yeah, I mean, you can't overstate maybe how difficult an ERP implementation is. I mean, I think if you've gone through a NAV project as a smaller mid-sized company and you've spent probably way more money than you spent on anything else, to look at, I mean, you're not even thinking about should I upgrade to another. Unless you go through a real process and a real assessment, you might look at another ERP system and think, oh, that looks nice, but you're not seriously thinking about changing, right? I mean, if I was me, I would be interested to learn about it. I'd be interested to see it, but until I put a real project in place and go through all that assessment first, it's just not happening.
Right? You don't do it on a whim. There has to be a real business reason, a business driver behind it. You don't just do it because I'm in a 5-year-older version or a 3-year-older version. There has to be some sort of a substantial reason either causing you to move forward, or even if you like living on the cutting edge, you have to be able to quantify that return on investment or be able to say, how fast will I get it? And then why would you? So you're right. I had a salesperson at a previous company that I worked with, a senior salesperson, and he would often say that, tell our prospects that no matter how much you like us today, at some point in the implementation phase, you're really going to dislike us because it is a stressful process. But our goal is that when it's all said and done, you'll like us again. So it's a very stressful event in a business, and I think no business owner takes that lightly, especially having been there once. They will eventually do it, but it's not going to happen just because Microsoft has brought a new, excellent product to the marketplace. There has to be some business driver on the customer side that predicates this move forward.
Yeah, that kind of brings us a little bit full circle in the conversation. The smaller, the small segment that's always looking at the stage where they are looking to upgrade. We'll look at it carefully. The rest, yeah, it makes sense. If you could see, I could see adding a flow in here, or I could see, let's face it, adding a sales app is lower impact.
Absolutely.
So you could, I could see adding, changing my sales app, perhaps. I mean, it's still not small, but it's smaller.
Or building your own Power App, right?
Yeah.
That allows you to now add another level of capability. Maybe somebody has a group of field reps that go out there and they need to do some data collection. It's much easier to create a Power App to do that than to upgrade your ERP system. Creating Power BI-based reports to get your executive leadership team easier access to and better visualized reports, that's an easier initiative and quick wins without a lot of investment.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was just one small anecdote. I was sitting in on a session here at Summit, and one of the things that a company did to improve their process was they were getting customer emails sent to customer support in some very inefficient way, maybe directly to individual agents, which caused all sorts of problems with sort of people picking them up and so forth. They got their solution was to have their customers email them a spreadsheet with the issue in the spreadsheet. That Flow would then pick up the email, separate out the document, and then use it as an import into the ERP, which sounded like a little bit of a kludge to me, but I think it was an incredible improvement for them. Using the Flow to pick that up, to route it, and to do it without someone touching it. I mean,
it probably sounds weird the first time, but if it's repetitive, and once a customer knows exactly what they have to do, and it's a specific spreadsheet template,
it just solves a huge point of pain.
Exactly. I think they get used to that process. Either way, they were putting it somewhere, whether it's in the form of email or something else. But yes, I think that the partner used a lot of ingenuity to, I think,
and it's something they could not have done before.
And when I say partner, I meant the user of Dynamics NAV or Dynamics GP or Business Central, whoever it was. But a lot of ingenuity in that idea. The end goal, I think, is to eliminate a lot of double entry. This happens with us as partners, and it happens with end users of ERP systems. Oftentimes, somebody provides you a certain piece of information that then needs to go into a system of record, and you're either having to manually copy and paste, or worse, you're having to retype that, which introduces the opportunity for error. So anytime we can use these productivity tools to shorten the process and increase accuracy, it's a win-win for everybody. And Microsoft's credit, they're doing these. That's where they're focusing their biggest advancements on.
Yeah, and doing it without having to bring in a developer and a lot of service hours.
Exactly.
For that, that's got to feel much better for the customer. So, cool. Well, maybe we'll wrap up here. Hopefully we're in a big echoey room, but hopefully it's been fairly quiet. What's next for you? Are you back to work after this week's summit wraps up? Back to clients and.
I think I'm conferenced out. So between Directions, which was excellent, and the UG Summit, which is excellent, and there's another day to go yet. I think there was a lot of learning, but I think it's time to take that learning back and impart the learning to and disseminate that information to our team and to our clients. And then I think it's heads down work. Over the next couple of months, we're going to work towards a strategy that I think is in more lockstep with Microsoft's really planning. And when we come back in May for the next Directions event, hopefully we'll all have some successes to talk about.
Very good. Well, AJ, thank you so much for taking the time today. It's been fun chatting with you. I love sort of throwing ideas around and seeing where they land. So appreciate it.
Likewise, Jason. It's always a pleasure talking to you, and I'm glad we made time to do this today.
This has been another episode of the MSDW Podcast. My thanks to AJ Ansari for joining me. If you have any comments, reach out. My email is jgumpert@msdynamicsworld.com. Until next time, this is MS Dynamics World signing off.